Awesome. So as everyone comes in from the waiting room, welcome to this EBC seminar on strategies for a bear market. I am Axie Oasis, and I am hosting Jaxie Wick to discuss everything health of the Axie economy related tonight, talk about overall strategies, what we've been seeing given SLP price movements, AXS price movements, Axie price movements, impending balance changes coming. All of these things will be topics that I asked Jaxie about tonight. And for a little bit of background, Jaxie Wick is a large scale breeder and scholar manager with over 1,000, I believe now, Jaxie. I'm sure you'll hit on some exact numbers, but maybe you can just let us know where you are kind of in your process and what you've been managing, and then probably ask you a couple questions.
We hit over 1,000 actually 2 weeks ago,
Damn.
but we had to downsize a couple hundred because, with the season 18 changes that happened. Some of the guys that are here in my Discord know that one of the managers I was working, we actually pulled 400 scholarships out. So that was quite a situation I didn't want to be in. But from that, we restructured, and I think out of the 400, we still have maybe 200 scholars off of that. Like, we had to reassign and everything. So we're actually back to, I think, just a little over 820-ish, 830-ish right now.
Gotcha.
But going back up. One important thing I did learn, though, is we're really focusing on quality now rather quantity. So I think we'll hit 1,000 or so in the next couple weeks again, but we might just start focusing on the better players rather really focusing on having to create as many scholarships as we can.
Gotcha. So focusing on quality, you
Yeah.
meaning of scholars, not of Axies.
No, quality of the Axies and the scholars, I would
Gotcha.
say. Because most of the builds, like I said, out of the 400 or so, I think the majority just weren't as playable. We've seen MMRs drop because of it, and so when we're swinging back, I decided after looking at the quality of the scholars we had, some of the training issues we had with the managers, we just decided to pull it all out and just restructure it with one of my other managers. So
Gotcha.
yeah.
So I guess one of the first questions, just kind of kicking it off here is, everyone has been kind of concerned about falling SLP prices and looking at what historic prices have been of Axies as well, depending on the build. But when you think about the overall health of the Axie economy, overall, how well the ecosystem is doing, is there anything that you're specifically keeping an eye on, and through the lens of someone who's obviously this large scale breeder, purchaser, scholar manager? If you're making large moves, if you have a couple of scholars or a couple of Axies, it's one thing. You can be a little more nimble, but someone of your size, and if you're doing something at real scale, what are the things that you're looking at to better, make sure you're positioned well and feel that you have a kind of a pulse on what's going on?
Right. Well, I mean, a couple of things I try to evaluate is, as most of you guys know, this game is play to earn, right? So I still look at the earning potential that is available for scholar accounts, right? Relative to what we're spending on these teams, right? Because if you're going to spend $2,000 on the team, I mean, you still want them to produce a decent return, right? Because most people getting into this game are looking for the return value, the return aspect of this. But a couple of things to really look at is where the long-term vision of this project is going. I know a lot of people here who are starting out that have less than 10 scholars. Like you said, they might be very agile, but not sure as to where to go, right? As far as SLP prices go, it has gotten quite low, but it's also another opportunity because when I first started building scholarships, I really wanted, most people want to have as many teams as you can possibly get, quality teams for the amount of ETH you're spending. And when SLP prices begin to pick up, Axis prices begin to pick up. I think a couple of things I really regretted was not building enough teams from the get-go, because back in May, early June, the prices we're seeing right now are relatively similar to then. So I really wanted to stack up more, right? So I do look at this as another opportunity. And as far as the price fluctuation goes, I know a lot of people are worried because they want to be able to breed to sell. Obviously, breeding to sell hasn't been as easy as it used to be, right? You do have to look for specific builds that people want. But if you keep those two things in mind, right? Just breeding things that people actually want to buy rather breeding things that everyone else is already breeding, you're going to have a big advantage. So a couple things I'm doing is going for more exotic builds that really work well in PvP. And as long as your fundamentals for the teams you're building, if you're building scholarships, as long as they're really solid fundamentals, have potential to do over 2.2k MMR, those Axies should really sell pretty fast. Any good Axies nowadays for the right price will always move, right? So if you're planning on breeding to sell, you do really have to follow, and you don't want to build any scholarship accounts. You do really have to look at what people are using in the current game. And you really want to obviously make sure your genes are a lot better. If you guys followed me on YouTube, one of the challenge series I did was where we didn't really focus so much on the R1 and R2 genes. We just focused on the key moves, which is great if you're trying to build a scholarship with a really, cheap cost. But long term, those Axies aren't Axies I'm going to be breeding anymore. You really want to start focusing on quality builds, because as you guys know, with mutation, through several generations down, Axie quality tend to get poor and poor, and you have to clean up your gene line, right? So as long as you're focusing on quality, I don't think you'll have any issues, especially with these prices right now, because the average breeding cost is still like 0.06 ETH. You can breed stuff that still sells for 0.2 plus. So I'm not really too worried as far as where the Axie economy is heading towards, because I think it's doing really well overall right now. There's massive upside still available in the game, right? With V2, land play and such. So
absolutely.
Right. So as far as making moves go, one of the biggest things I did after season 18 was really evaluate the builds that I was building. So at the time, one of the managers I was working with wasn't so much of a heavy player. So one of the newer managers I brought on in August was super solid player. He was able to get to like 2,500 MMR with like these brand new builds that we worked on. And we really began brainstorming more about what to build for PvP, looking for builds that people aren't actually using right now, but might have value in the future, right? I don't really like to chase trends, because I used to chase a couple trends back in June, right? June, July, when things begin to peak out. Nowadays, if you really want to make quite a bit of ETH, you have to start thinking about what might come up in the future. So some of the builds, like we talked about too, a couple weeks ago when we first talked, right, about the builds we're talking about for plants and such. Yeah, like you really have to start brainstorming, right? Anything that has real good use in PvP will be sought out, not by just players now, but by breeders, right? So if you're looking after solid fundamentals, not so much broken builds, but just builds that will easily let your scholars get to 2k plus MMR, 2.2k plus, those builds, those Axies will always fetch a higher price than Axies that are just overpopulated, right? So right, so just that's a couple of things I look at as far as like making money in the Axie economy goes. So yeah, I'm not too worried. I don't really judge the economy on SLP price and AXS. I typically look at the overall like transaction volume. Transaction volume is still strong. And again, there's a lot of upside in the game still, a lot of growth. So long term, I'm not too worried. Short term, the day-to-day stuff, does get worrying at times. But
are you comfortable talking about like some of those exotic builds and some of the things
one of the things
discovered?
Yeah, so one of the things in August we started doing was really focusing on battle plant tanks. So example is like Little Branch, I think with plants are the most undervalued especially right now in the marketplace. Because if you look at, so like Little Branch, Watering Can, Serious, Hot Butt, right? Those kind of plants.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can swap out Little Branch for like Pliers or Dual Blade,
Yep.
Pocky even. You know, those plants tend to be much more superior than the typical plants you see because they can deal quite the damage, right? You'll start seeing more plants with hair, and we're even trying sandal right now on plants too. But basically, I think nowadays, like people used to think about plants as more about taking punishment and stealing energy, right? But I think with the way the gameplay has shifted, especially with season 18, and you can kind of see the last couple of weeks the way people have been building. Like people are really focusing on Axies that'll win you the most matches, right? Because the more matches you win, the more SLP you generate, and you can climb the MMRs, right? And the higher MMR you get to. We actually had a scholar that hit 926 on the leaderboard,
Nice.
and just in 2 weeks. But then he bounced back down to like 1200, before the season ended. But it's so nowadays we're focusing on like battle plans. We're really focusing on optimal builds. So you really don't want to have any builds that give you a disadvantage. I don't think there's a big market for that as much anymore unless you're planning on selling it for a loss, right? So
Mhm.
if your Axies have like one of the genes, right, or the cards, if you're really lacking in one of them, and it's just because how you only draw 3 cards per turn.
Yep.
Yeah, if you get a really bad draw, you're kind of screwed, right?
Mm.
So I try to weed out any inefficiencies. And as far as selling Axies go, I'm planning on selling soon. We're just building a little bit more of the inventory side because we've been changing out all our scholar builds for the most part the last couple of weeks. But
Got it.
once I'm kind of done with that transition phase, and we're gonna really start using the EBC tool as well as checking like average prices, and then really start focusing on the selling aspect of Axie Infinity.
Yeah, being able to use the tool to
Yeah.
see historically how that's tracked over time, definitely massively beneficial for
Mhm.
someone like you as you're comping similar builds that are across a lot of your different scholars.
Yeah.
One of the other questions that I had was, thinking about pace. And when you were talking about it earlier, you said, now is like a great time because breeding costs are,
Mhm.
relatively cheap. So maybe talking about relative to a month ago or so, how are you? And I guess it has a little bit to do with the transition and all of that, but pace of breeding, purchasing, what you're looking for. Are you doing more transaction volume now, more breeding volume now than you were a month ago, given
Yeah.
the change of, and
Oh
we
yeah,
also
no,
we also talk
absolutely.
about the SLP change
I
and
mean,
the
I know a lot of people were worried about the prices and such, but I
mm,
looked at it as another opportunity because the biggest regret I really had was when I first started playing Axie Infinity. I did, as most people were breeding to sell, but I didn't really focus on the scholarship aspect of it until prices begin to pick up like crazy in July, right? And the problem with that is some of the scholar teams I built in July now just aren't as useful now, right? Like I remember I ended up spending like 1.5 ETH on a reptile, and now reptile is like the same reptiles, like 7 times less in price, right?
mm,
So yeah, one of the key things I really learned with the whole run up and such is I was like, man, like I really needed a more solid infrastructure. And so I really just started focusing on stacking teams once prices started to come back down a bit, because that was like a big wake up call. Because the other aspect to this is, I mean, if you're just breeding to sell, you don't have any scholar teams, and there's a lot of risk there, right? So we're still breeding pretty much the same. I think we bred like 60 or 70 Axies last night. I have a couple more to do today
mhm.
because we're claiming SLP from our scholar accounts. So, but no, I'm still breeding as much as I can. Quite a lot still, right?
Yep.
Obviously, the biggest issue is getting more access, right? But yeah, I'm still breeding normally. Nothing has really changed as far as pacing goes. Um, but I'm really just focusing on getting more quality Axies. As far as buying Axies go, we did do. I think we spent like 2 ETH or something yesterday, grabbing more backline reptiles and such. I guess I can share the as far as the moves go. It was like Razorbite, Bone Sail, Tiny Dino, and I think it was Cerestes. So I think those are really good backline reptiles right now, especially because there's so many double aqua builds, right?
Yep.
So I think I ended up grabbing like 8 of those, I think, yesterday. And then we grabbed a couple more midline, aquas with like Sponge, Nemo, like Dual Blade, Risky Fish,
Yep.
just to clean up the lines a little bit because I needed a couple more because I didn't have any because all of them are related. So yeah, I'm still buying, still breeding. Everything's the same. But what I'm really looking at now is, I think, again, one of the biggest mistakes I made back in July was you kind of like buy into these hyped up inflated prices. So nowadays, when I'm looking at Axie prices, I try to be a little bit more grounded because I remember when aqua prices are like over an ETH. Remember back in like July. So yeah, so you really want to start thinking about builds that just aren't popular because if something's very low key, no one's really talking about it, the price of it's going to be super, super low, right, before it starts to pick up. But yeah, I'm still buying, still breeding, still selling and such. So nothing has really changed. Literally the last 2 months, like nothing has changed, like same pacing and such. I guess the biggest change really is increasing the quality of the scholars. I think my South American manager actually, because he got way too many applicants for the scholarship, he ended up making a 300 question exam for people because a couple of his TikTok videos to get scholars went viral, and he got like 10,000 applicants. So we ended up making like a 300 question test. And I mean, if you're super serious about playing the game, you're gonna go through all the questions, right? So yeah, so we're really focusing on quality now. We're not giving accounts out to random people. They also have to come through the training process, but we really expanded the training session a little bit more. So every player, before they like graduate to play for us, have to know how to card count, energy count, understand combos and everything. So we're not giving like brand new people who don't know about the game an account now. So quality of everything's pretty much up, like quality of the team.
And it makes sense, right? You're supplying them with a premium product. You're giving them top Axies that you have thought through, bred, et cetera, to enable them to compete at that highest level. So, making sure that they have the training and the skills and able to use what you're giving them, obviously massively helpful and important. And I think I think it's kind of an overlooked aspect of the overall scholarship process. So I'm glad that you hit on that. Maybe talking about, the moves and the cards. And as you think of, these new, the balance changes that are going to be coming up, talking about, I heard pliers and little branch on tanks. Obviously, a lot of people have seen, bug beast damage on aqua midliners as well. But when you think about the overall balance change, throw terminators in there as well, that being, turned into duskinators. And when you think about all the changes, how do you think about those in terms of, hey, I'm looking for, dual blade on aquas, and how does that, anything around the balance changes and what Axies might be getting better or worse, like on the margin there?
I mean, if you look at it historically, they've done balance changes before and it hasn't really affected price as much. So I'm not really too worried about any of these changes. I know people that have stacked up heavily on broken builds might be affected the most, right? So an example with terminators, I mean, I don't really see terminators being broken necessarily. I know because there's a lot of counters around that now, right? But I think if you're breeding a Terminator only farm and you're really worried about these changes, right? You can always just sell them all, hold on to a couple pairs, and just breed them back up. If you're too worried about that, right? But
just reduce the exposure,
right?
Don't get out of the business. Just reduce the exposure,
right? But again, with balance changes, we haven't really seen big problems coming out of that historically, right? Because I've been playing since May and we've gone through a couple balance changes before, but we haven't really seen prices changes. But actually, I think prices have actually gone up after balance changes. If you look at Double Talk after they did the balance change on Double Talk, like everyone that was holding Double Talk, their prices went up like crazy, right? So I don't really see this being a big issue necessarily. But it's also one of the reasons why I do recommend building scholarships, because if you're just breeding to sell, I mean, these changes could probably affect you to an extent, but it's nothing too big in my opinion. I haven't really seen anything that wiped anyone's like value out, right? You might see some price decreases, some going up, but overall, if you're in it for the long run, I mean, I don't really see this being a big problem.
And do you think there's anything out there that is, I mean, nothing's, immune, right? I mean, the developers can change any card that they think is
Mhm.
out of whack right now. But, from a
True.
basic understanding of the meta and the way things have been playing, what would you consider a safer on on your more like exotic build kind of stance where it's like,
I
this
mean
is
that's
solid fundamentals of the
right.
meta?
I mean, so that's what it boils down to, synergy of the build, right?
Hmm.
I mean, the developers, because the game is still in alpha, I mean, they can make the tweaks and changes necessary, but V2 is coming out towards the end of the year, and that's going to be probably the biggest change we see, right? So
Hmm.
everyone's like nitpicking about these little tiny changes that are happening right now because it might affect prices today. But if you guys have seen the upcoming stuff for V2, which Psychout said that V2 probably will be coming out towards the winter season, which makes sense because it's going to be after esports, right? I mean, there's going to be even more changes in V2. Like body parts are going to be a thing, eyes and ears are going to be a thing, right? So all these, like, because right now we only have 4 playable cards, but I'm pretty sure we'll have like 6, after in V2, probably with eyes and ears involved, right? So
Mm.
people are worried about now. I'd be worried about V2. I think that's the biggest change we're going to see overall for all the Axie cards, right?
Yep.
So yeah, as far as right now goes, like all these little changes you see, nah, I don't really think it's a big problem.
Anything else that you've heard in the
Mm.
ecosystem, whether it's AXS staking or anything else around the environment, changing your thought process or overall kind of views? It sounds like you're taking
Mm.
obviously a very like measured long-term view on the game,
Yeah.
setting up a good process with your scholars and all of this. But
Mm.
when you think about the next when you think about like any other news and maybe what would you be doing and how would you be reacting to it when it does hit?
So, like 'cause like we talked about with like AXS staking coming up, I don't really see that being a big. It's not gonna be like as big as I think people think about. I think it's gonna take maybe a month or two really for that those like if AXS staking comes out say tomorrow. I mean, I don't really think we'll see AXS pricing mooning that quickly. It might take
Right.
a couple more breeding cycles, right? But I think overall with as far as what I've been hearing, with AXS staking, because that does put less AXS out into circulation. So the
Mm.
assumption is the price is going to go up. But even if the price goes up, I think that's going to be a win for everyone in Axie Infinity because, well, Axie prices are going to have to go up if AXS price goes up, right?
Hmm.
So I think that's going to be great. Um, people have been talking about the Ronin index, and that's the whole
Yep.
other piece to tackle, right?
Right.
But even having an exchange on the marketplace would be a big win. And the developers have already, I think that might be the AXS ecosystem probably that they put on the roadmap, right?
Yep.
So we might not actually see that till maybe next year, maybe I think like early Q1 maybe. But there's a lot of these little things coming out that's going to add more value to Axie Infinity as well as the Axie marketplace. So not much that I've heard yet, right? But all I can really say is just I would just keep going at what you're doing normally, right? I mean, I wouldn't be too worried about these issues. I don't really see them as issues, right? I
Hmm.
would just keep breeding as you are, build scholar teams, but you should always try to be ahead of the curve, right? So all these tools coming out are really helpful, right? I'm using EBC a little bit more nowadays for some of the stuff that I'm looking to breed to sell and such. So I think it's a really good value to the community.
Yeah.
Um, but overall, as far as all these changes or potential changes that might come up, I don't really see it destroying the economy or anything necessarily. I just think it's going to add more value. as we get closer and closer to land play, right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I couldn't agree. Couldn't agree more. I think as long as you trust the developers and that they have, players' views at heart, right? And their economy relies on player engagement and people being excited about the next thing. So yes, I agree. I agree with a lot of almost all your comments there. So absolutely. Thanks for all that. I think that's pretty much everything that I have now. That I wanted to ask, but again, I just wanted to say that this seminar was hosted by the Elite Breeders Club. Website is elitebreeders.club. We're also going to be having Jaxie inside of the Discord channel for members to ask questions after we sign off here. So if anyone wants to pop into the private chat, make sure to do that. And for anyone who is new and hasn't, been exposed to any of the EBC's content, go check out the website. There's a lot of free tools out there. And, for people who want to take their Axie Infinity to the next level, there's an NFT pass that gives you access to the market analyzer, which gives historic price, volume, data on every type of build combination you want to put together. Jax has been using it. I've been using it. We have a whole host of people that are, getting a lot of really good use out of all that. So I definitely encourage you to check that out. And yeah, there's plenty of free content for anyone else who's on there. So yeah, definitely go check out the website. We'll have links tied to this and up on the YouTube channel shortly. And yeah, for all the members, hop into the Discord channel and feel free to ask Jaxie any questions. But thank you.
No, I'll be in the private lounge, I think.
Yeah, the private lounge. I'm sorry.
Whichever one. I don't know, whichever one.
Yeah. Private voice channel chat for members. But yeah, thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll see you all next time.